I have to admit, the moment Chanel's health scare started to feel more serious, the entire emotional tone of Days of Our Lives shifted for me. For Wednesday, April 22nd, it looks like Chanel Dupree DeMera may finally be forced to confront something she has been trying not to think about. After Johnny recently discovered a lump in her breast, Chanel seemed determined to brush it aside, almost as if ignoring it could somehow make it disappear. To me, that felt less like denial and more like fear. Sometimes the things we refuse to face are the things that frighten us the most. Johnny, however, does not appear willing to let this go. From what I can see, he is stepping into protective husband mode, making sure Chanel gets medical attention whether she wants to slow down and deal with it or not. Sarah Horton is expected to examine Chanel and quickly agree that this cannot wait. Once Sarah orders a mammogram immediately, the situation suddenly feels much more real. And I think that is the moment when concern could turn into genuine panic. At the same time, another tension-filled reunion is unfolding when Lani Price Grant reconnects with Kristen DeMera. On the surface, this seems like two old friends catching up after far too much time apart. But with Kristen, nothing ever stays simple for long. Lani may sympathize with Kristen over losing Rachel again, yet I cannot help wondering if Lani will sense that Kristen is hiding something darker beneath that pain. And honestly, she would be right to worry. Kristen is reportedly moving forward with a shocking plan involving Johnny, and Sophia Choi may be getting pulled deeper into it. The most unsettling part for me is that Kristen appears to be using grief and rage as fuel, and that usually means someone innocent ends up in the crossfire. If Lani ever discovered what Kristen was truly planning, especially since Johnny is family, the fallout would be explosive. Meanwhile, Marlena Evans is set to put Xander Kyriakis under intense pressure. I was wondering if Marlena has started seeing through the layers of deception surrounding Johnny and the legal mess that has been quietly building. Marlena has always had a way of pulling the truth out of people, even when they are determined to keep it buried, so Xander may not be able to dodge her questions for long. Elsewhere, Kate Roberts Brady continues spinning her version of events to Roman Brady, hoping he accepts her story without digging any deeper. But in Salem, secrets rarely stay hidden forever, and the longer Kate keeps bending the truth, the more dangerous that lie could become. Then there is Tate Black, who finds himself in another fierce confrontation with Sophia. She is expected to unleash her anger on him, and from my perspective, that could reveal just how much pressure Sophia is really under. What makes this even more dangerous is the possibility that Sophia could become distracted by Kristen's influence and the deadly path she may already be walking down. That is what makes this episode feel especially unsettling to me. Chanel may be facing a frightening medical crisis at the exact same time that Kristen's revenge scheme begins spiraling towards something irreversible. One story carries emotional heartbreak, while the other carries the threat of real catastrophe, and both seem ready to collide in a way that could change everything in Salem. I think as May Sweeps gets closer on Days of Our Lives, it already feels like the show is setting up one of those months where almost every storyline is about to collide at once. To me, the biggest theme seems to be that nearly everyone in Salem is about to face the consequences of choices they thought they could quietly bury. For Chad DeMera, I was wondering how long he could realistically keep that promise to stay away from Kat Green emotionally. He may try to redirect himself by spending time with Belle Black, and on paper, that sounds like a safe distraction. But in Salem, distractions usually become complications. The more Chad watches Kat grow closer to EJ DeMera, the harder it may become for him to pretend he is unaffected. And because custody is hanging over his head, every emotional misstep could become much bigger than just romance. Then there is the reading of Stefano DeMera's will, which honestly sounds like classic DeMera chaos waiting to happen. Whenever this family gathers for anything involving power, money, or secrets, it rarely ends with everyone walking away peacefully. I think that could become one of the moments that reshapes multiple storylines at once. The most dangerous situation may come from Kristen DiMera making the reckless decision to involve Sophia Choi in a deadly plan. The intended target may be Johnny DiMera, but soap operas almost never let a plan hit the intended person cleanly. To me, Chanel Dupree DiMera feels like the one who could end up paying the emotional price. Even if Chanel survives physically, the real question may become whether this changes Johnny in a way that pushes him deeper into his DiMera side. Sometimes the emotional fallout is worse than the actual attack. And if EJ DiMera learns Kristen was behind any of it, I do not see that ending quietly. Kristen has managed to survive a lot in this family, but betrayal inside the DiMera circle can be a different kind of unforgivable. She may not just lose family trust, she could lose personal relationships that mattered far more than she realized. Meanwhile, Gabby Hernandez looks like she is standing on very thin ice. Her relationship with Philip Kyriakis already feels fragile, and if he learns she played a role in destroying the merger and worsening Titan's financial mess, that may be the final blow. What makes it worse is not just what she did, it is how long she kept doing it while pretending everything was fine. In Salem, deception usually hurts more than the original crime. The return of Lexi Carver could also send shockwaves through the entire town. I think the emotional center of that story may fall on Abe Carver. If he learns that Paulina Price and Theo Carver kept something this enormous from him, the betrayal may hit harder than the miracle itself. Then there is the situation with Stephanie Kyriakis and Alex Kyriakis, which feels like it could become one of the most emotionally grounded stories in the middle of all the bigger soap chaos. The arrival of Joy Wesley and the baby she has been hiding could completely change Alex's life overnight. I think what makes this story interesting is that it is not just about the baby. It is about whether Stephanie can handle a future she never pictured for herself. Sometimes a surprise child does not just test a relationship. It reveals whether the couple ever wanted the same life to begin with. And Stephanie learning how to use a gun? To me, that feels less like empowerment and more like foreshadowing. On soaps, people rarely start handling weapons unless the writers are preparing for something to go very wrong. Overall, I think May is shaping up to be one of those months where Days of Our Lives leans fully into what it does best: family betrayals, emotional fallout, and the kind of shocking turns that leave Salem looking very different by the end of it. I have to say, watching that moment on Monday's episode, I couldn't help thinking Stephanie may have accidentally done more damage to her own marriage than any secret she has been keeping from Alex. And strangely, it was not because she turned to Jeremy in the first place. To me, the real problem was what she revealed to him. When Stephanie brought up how, a year ago, Alex was not ready to start a family when everyone believed Joy Wesley was pregnant, it felt like one of those soap moments where you can almost see another character connecting the dots in real time. The second she said it, I was wondering if Jeremy had just been handed a piece of information he should never have had. At first, Alex believed he might be facing an unexpected future with Joy, only for everyone to later learn it was a false alarm. Or at least that is what Stephanie believes. But the look on Jeremy's face suggested he may already suspect that story was never completely over. Then came that final scene, when Jeremy quietly called his father, asking for a phone number. That was the moment it clicked for me. He almost certainly wants Joy. Joy left Salem carrying what appears to be Alex's child, and she left without telling him. She disappeared to stay with her mother, Nancy. And because Nancy has become involved again with Jeremy's father, Mike, Jeremy may now have a direct path to information he never had before. Stephanie, without realizing it, may have just handed him the missing link that ties Alex, Joy, and that baby together. And if I am reading this right, Jeremy now has exactly what he needs. Not just to expose a secret, but to create a fracture between Stephanie and Alex that he can slip right into. We already knew Joy was returning, but I honestly could not figure out why the show would bring her back right now, unless her return was meant to hit this relationship at its weakest point. After Monday, it feels much less like coincidence, and much more like Jeremy may be orchestrating the entire thing behind the scenes. Maybe Jeremy is no longer the violent man Stephanie once feared. Maybe the show wants us to believe he has changed. But manipulation is still manipulation. And if he is using Joy and that baby to break Stephanie's life apart just so he can get another chance with her, then any sympathy the audience may have started to feel for him could disappear very quickly. For Stephanie, the heartbreaking part is that she may not even realize she started this herself. One innocent conversation. One careless detail. And now a secret that should have stayed buried may be on the verge of blowing up everything. I think Chad's return to Salem already feels like it was designed to throw gasoline on every fire that is already burning. Connor Floyd makes his debut today, and almost immediately Chad finds himself face to face with Kat, which, to me, is the kind of first scene that tells you the writers are not easing him back in gently. With Lexi's return looming, Kristen sinking deeper into revenge, and EJ developing feelings for Kat while slipping further into his darker instincts, Chad is walking straight into chaos before he can even get comfortable. What makes it interesting is that Floyd says stepping into the role has felt surprisingly natural. After playing Chance on The Young and the Restless, moving into Salem could have felt like jumping into an entirely different world, but he described it as a smooth transition. I was wondering how any actor could take over such an established character without feeling the pressure. But it sounds like Floyd approached Chad very carefully. He spent time talking with Billy Flynn about the character, trying to understand who Chad really is before making him his own. And from the way he described it, he still sees Chad as someone he is continuing to discover, rather than someone he has fully figured out already. What really stood out to me, though, was how far back Floyd went to prepare. He did not just watch recent episodes. He went back to Joe Mascolo's Stefano, because he realized that even though Stefano is gone, his presence still hangs over nearly every DiMera story. In Salem, Stefano is not just family history. He is practically a permanent atmosphere. And when Chad is a DiMera, that shadow matters. Floyd said he wanted Chad to carry just a trace of Stefano within him. Not enough to make him another villain, but enough to remind viewers where he comes from. I actually think that could be the smartest way to approach the role. Chad has always felt like one of the more grounded DiMeras, the one trying not to become the family he was born into. But no one with that last name ever completely escapes it. Even when they want to live differently, the family legacy has a way of pulling them back in. And that seems to be exactly where Chad is headed now. Floyd described Chad as being at a crossroads, trying to build his own future while the DiMera legacy keeps interfering. To me, that sounds less like a temporary conflict and more like the core of his entire return. The big question is where that leaves him once the dust starts flying. Does Chad get pulled toward Kat despite everything complicated surrounding her? Could Belle somehow become part of that story? Does he stay focused on the spectator, or does the growing disaster inside DiMera pull him back into the family business, whether he wants it or not? Then there is the inevitable EJ problem. Chad has always understood his brother better than most people in Salem, but understanding EJ and defending him are two very different things. With EJ sliding into behavior that feels more and more like Stefano, Chad may find himself forced to decide whether loyalty to family matters more than doing what he believes is right. And with Kristen and EJ on another collision course, there may not be any safe middle ground for him to stand on. I may be wrong, but Chad's return feels like it could become much bigger than a simple recast. It feels like the beginning of a story where Chad finally has to decide whether he can live with the DiMera legacy, or whether he is the one who might eventually try to take control of it before it destroys what is left of his family. I kept thinking Theo was playing with fire the moment he started journaling in public. There he was, completely lost in his own head, writing about Gabby like he was the star of his own private romance novel. And then, of course, because this is Salem, Gabby herself walks in and sits down right across from him. Theo tries to brush off what happened the night before by calling it sensory overload, which honestly felt like the safest possible way to describe whatever emotional storm he is actually dealing with. He tells Gabby he is worried he may have messed things up with Jada, but then almost immediately admits he was never really that invested in Jada in the first place. To me, that was the real reveal in that scene. Theo is pretending his problem is how to end one relationship, when the truth may be that his feelings have already moved somewhere else entirely. Because Gabby is Jada's best friend, Theo asks her how he should break things off. Gabby gives him the most straightforward advice in the world: just be honest and respectful. Simple enough. But then Theo gets up, walks away, and leaves his journal sitting there wide open under the menu, open to the page where he had been writing about those very personal dreams involving G. And honestly, I was sitting there thinking, Theo, how do you make a mistake that dramatic? In Salem, leaving your private thoughts unattended is practically an invitation for disaster. Meanwhile, Stephanie is still visibly shaken after everything that happened with Alex, and she calls Jeremy over so she can talk. She admits she completely lost it, and Jeremy, in a surprisingly calm moment, tells her he understands because he feels like a mess too. Their conversation circles back to children, fear, and timing, and it becomes clear that neither of them is standing on solid emotional ground right now. Stephanie brings up the idea of kids again, and Jeremy slips into that familiar wounded tone when he talks about how he once wanted fatherhood but wasn't ready then, while now Stephanie is the one who feels uncertain. I may be wrong, but Jeremy seems like someone who is trying to make sense of his own regrets while quietly projecting them onto Stephanie. He tells her Alex does not fully understand what she is going through, but then admits he has been reevaluating his own life too. More importantly, he says he is staying in town. And then he gives her that dangerous kind of reassurance, that if Alex finds out he was there, neither of them has to say anything. For now, he tells her he is there if she needs him. That line may have sounded comforting on the surface, but to me it felt like the beginning of a complication no one is ready for. Out in the square, Alex finds Chanel at a bakery table and unloads his frustration about the fight with Stephanie. He is clearly spiraling into self-doubt, wondering if he somehow caused all of this. Chanel tries to stop him from making it about himself and reminds him that Stephanie is still recovering, emotionally, physically, mentally, all of it. And honestly, Chanel was right. Alex wants answers immediately, but Stephanie is still trying to understand herself. Chanel practically pushes Alex back home, and by pure chance, he completely misses Jeremy leaving. That near miss felt intentional, because Salem loves delayed explosions more than immediate ones. When Alex gets home, he and Stephanie finally manage to calm down enough to really talk. They both admit they need to communicate better. They agree there can be no more emotional ambushes and definitely no more surprise baby conversations dropped like bombs in the middle of the room. Then the mood softens. Alex promises to give Stephanie the time she needs to figure out what she truly wants. And in that moment, Stephanie admits that right now, what she needs is him. The tension between them shifts, the distance disappears, and they slowly find their way back to each other as Stephanie leads him toward the bedroom. It was one of those scenes that was less about passion and more about emotional relief. Two people trying to reconnect after nearly losing each other in one conversation. Across town, Rafe updates Kat on his latest plan involving Kristen, who he now sees as his unwilling insider. Unfortunately, Kristen did not find anything in the secret room, which only deepens the mystery. Once Megan's resurrection pods are mentioned again, both of them come to the same chilling conclusion. Another dead DiMera may be on the way back. And when they start naming possibilities, Stefan, Jake, even dismissing Stefano because there is barely anything left of him, the conversation lands on Abigail. The second Abigail's name comes up, Kat is visibly shaken. I can understand why Rafe would go there, because Abigail's return would send shockwaves through almost every major family in Salem. But at the same time, it felt almost too obvious, which makes me wonder if the writers are using Abby's name as a distraction before revealing someone else entirely. Then the tone shifts again when Lani suddenly appears in the square. Chanel is trying to calm a fussy Trey when Lani walks up and surprises her. She and the twins came back early while Eli stays behind to wrap things up, and the warmth in that reunion instantly changes the mood. Lani is thrilled for her sister and the new baby, and for a brief second, it feels like one of those rare, peaceful family moments. And then Theo shows up. Or almost does. Because just as he is about to step into that family gathering, he realizes he left his journal behind. The moment he turned around, I knew trouble was coming. Because in Salem, secrets do not stay hidden long, especially when someone accidentally leaves them sitting on a cafe table. Back at home, Jeremy learns from Julie that Lani and the twins have returned. Julie is glowing as she talks about seeing them again and remembering how much Doug loved those children. It is a warm scene, but Jeremy immediately undercuts it the second he is alone. He quietly makes a phone call to his father and asks for a phone number. And that single moment raised more questions than almost anything else in the episode. Because whose number does Jeremy need badly enough to make that call now? And just when that mystery lands, Kat is out in the square when she suddenly spots Charlotte. That was the kind of ending that felt small on the surface, but in Salem, those quiet final moments are often the ones that matter most. I have to say, one of the most interesting parts of Days of Our Lives right now is how quickly the show is tying Connor Floyd's version of Chad DiMera back to Abigail's lingering absence. As soon as Chad stepped into the DiMera mansion, I noticed the writers wasted no time giving him emotional weight. Instead of easing into the recast, they immediately had Chad confront Dan Feuerriegel's E.J. DiMera about the mysterious pod. To me, that felt deliberate. The show wanted viewers to understand that no matter who is playing Chad, Abigail is still the emotional center of his story. When EJ finally admitted that the person connected to the pod was Abigail, Chad's reaction felt completely understandable. I think what made that scene work was Chad's suspicion. He was not just shocked, he was questioning whether EJ might be hiding something much deeper. Because of EJ's complicated history with Abigail, Chad even seemed to wonder if EJ could somehow be trying to bring her back for himself. That may sound extreme, but in Salem, almost nothing feels impossible anymore. What really stood out to me was the reminder that Abigail's body was never actually in her grave. That detail did not feel random. On a soap, missing remains usually mean unfinished business. The moment the writers brought that up again, it felt like they were quietly telling the audience not to close the book on Abigail just yet. Even though EJ tried to shut the idea down, saying his feelings for Abigail are long behind him, the conversation still planted a bigger question. If Abigail is not returning now, why bring all of this back to the surface so suddenly? That is where Sophia Mattsson's casting becomes hard to ignore. Her role has been kept under wraps, and her debut is not expected until early 2027. I could be wrong, but soaps rarely introduce mystery casting without a larger purpose. The timing makes me wonder if the show is slowly setting the stage for Abigail's return in a new form. At the same time, Chad is being pulled into this complicated situation with Kat Green and possibly EJ as well, which could create an emotional mess before Abigail ever reappears. From a storytelling perspective, that actually makes sense. The writers may want Chad emotionally vulnerable first, so Abigail's return hits even harder when it finally happens. To me, the biggest clue was not just the dialogue about resurrection. It was the fact that Chad himself brought Abigail into the conversation immediately. For a newly recast character, that feels like more than nostalgia. It feels like direction. And if that is true, then Abigail may not be gone from Salem nearly as permanently as everyone once believed. I was really struck by how Wednesday's Days of Our Lives seems to revolve around one simple question. Who in Salem is actually being honest, and who is just getting better at pretending? Xander keeps insisting that therapy with Marlena Evans is changing him, and I think part of him may even believe that. He wants to see himself as someone who is finally becoming a better man. The problem is, Marlena has spent her life reading people, and she can tell when someone is giving polished answers instead of truthful ones. This time, she puts Xander in a corner and asks the questions he has been carefully avoiding. To me, that could be the moment where Xander has to decide whether he truly wants redemption, or whether he just wants credit for trying. Then there is Kate Roberts, who usually never has trouble justifying her own actions. Roman was already upset after learning Kate set up Johnny DiMera over Bonnie's stolen manuscript, but Kate sees it differently. In her mind, she did not frame Johnny at all. She probably believes that if Johnny was careless enough to publish a book he never even read, then he practically set himself up. And honestly, from Kate's point of view, there is a twisted logic there. What makes it interesting is that even though she does not need to lie to Roman Brady, she still does. That makes me wonder if Kate is hiding more than she wants anyone to know. Meanwhile, Johnny is facing a much more personal crisis. At first, he struggled with the idea of Chanel Dupree becoming pregnant, despite the medical risks. But eventually, he let himself feel hopeful. Now, that fear has come rushing back, because he worries Chanel's cancer may have returned. What stands out to me is that Johnny suddenly decides he should be the one to determine what happens next. That sounds less like love and more like panic. And in Salem, those two emotions often become dangerously tangled. On another front, Tate Black is convinced that Sophia Choi drugged Holly Jonas with antipsychotic medication. The only problem is that suspicion and proof are two very different things. Tate has managed to get Sophia's fingerprints, and he seems to think that will somehow expose everything. But I think he may be underestimating Sophia. She has already shown she can stay several steps ahead of him, and now she has an even more dangerous ally in Kristen DiMera. That alone could turn Tate's investigation into a disaster. And then there is Kristen herself, whose history in Salem is almost impossible to explain without sounding ridiculous. I still cannot forget the period when Kristen was pretending to be a nun alongside Lani Price, which even by Salem standards felt surreal. But strangely enough, that bizarre chapter created a real bond between them. Now that Lani is back, I cannot help wondering whether that connection could resurface. They are both mothers now, both very different women than they were before. And sometimes in Salem, the most unexpected relationships end up becoming the most important ones. I think what made Stephen Schnetzer's recent return to Days of Our Lives feel so interesting was not just the nostalgia of seeing a familiar face again. For longtime viewers, it was also the reminder that sometimes a single career decision can quietly change everything, even when the person making that choice does not see it as some dramatic turning point in the moment. When Schnetzer appeared on the Jim Masters show, I was struck by how casually he talked about what could have been one of the biggest decisions of his career. There was no grand story about chasing fame or making a bold statement. He simply explained that at the time, he was not under contract at Days of Our Lives, so when another opportunity came along, he made a choice. As he put it, he gave his notice at the show, went back to New York, and stepped into a Broadway production of Philomena. What makes that part even more fascinating to me is that the production itself became more prestigious than he originally expected. Legendary director Franco Zeffirelli was attached, and then Laurence Olivier became involved as well. Schnetzer joked that he got 2 for the price of 1, and that line alone says a lot about how he viewed the experience, not as a calculated gamble, but as an unexpected gift. What really stayed with me was the way he described the decision itself. He said, "I decided to take the riskier one." That line sounds dramatic on paper, but the way he told it, it almost felt practical. To him, it was not about leaving Salem behind. It was about taking the next job. And honestly, maybe that is the part people outside the business do not always understand. For working actors, especially in daytime television, the path is often less about long-term strategy and more about recognizing when the right door opens. And in Schnetzer's case, that one door changed the entire shape of his career. That Broadway role eventually led him to One Life to Live. From there came Another World, and ultimately the role of Cass Winthrop, the character many soap fans still immediately associate with him. Looking back now, it is hard not to see that moment as the hinge point. If he had stayed at Days, that entire chapter of his career might have unfolded very differently. I also found it interesting how he never treated one medium as more important than another. To him, theater was not superior to soaps. Soap work was not lesser than Broadway. It was all part of the same craft. He talked about how stage work sharpened him as a performer, while daytime television demanded speed, stamina, and emotional flexibility. And when he laughed about some of the more outrageous soap storylines, saying they could feel almost Shakespearean in their absurdity, it did not sound dismissive. If anything, it sounded like someone who understood exactly how strange and demanding that world could be, while still respecting it. That perspective feels rare. A lot of actors look back on their careers and reshape their past into a neat story about destiny. Schnetzer did not seem interested in doing that. He was not romanticizing the choice. He was simply describing what happened. A Broadway offer came along, he took it, and life moved in a completely different direction. And maybe that is what makes the story resonate. Sometimes the moments that define a career do not feel monumental when they happen. Sometimes they just feel like work, until years later when you realize one ordinary decision quietly changed everything. As May Sweeps gets closer on Days of Our Lives, I think the writers are clearly setting up one of those months where almost every family in Salem gets pulled into chaos at the same time. Looking at everything that is starting to build, it feels less like a collection of separate storylines and more like a chain reaction that could change several relationships all at once. One of the most interesting threads to me is Chad DiMera. After returning to Salem, he may genuinely try to honor the promise he made to Thomas and avoid jumping into another romance too quickly. But with Chad, emotions usually become more complicated than intentions. Even if he tries to distract himself by taking Belle Black out, I was wondering if that could just make his unresolved feelings even harder to ignore. The real problem may be seeing the growing connection between Kat and EJ DiMera, because jealousy has a way of exposing what someone refuses to admit to themselves. Then there is the looming reading of Stefano DiMera's will. On this show, a DiMera family will reading is never just paperwork. To me, that feels like the perfect setup for hidden conditions, long-buried secrets, and one of those shocking twists that sends the entire family into another war. At the same time, Kristen DiMera appears ready to make another dangerous move, and this one could spiral badly. Her plan involving Sophia Choi seems intended to strike at Johnny DiMera, but plans in Salem rarely hit the intended target. I think the real danger could fall on Chanel Dupree DiMera instead, which immediately raises bigger questions about her pregnancy and whether an innocent life could end up caught in someone else's revenge. If that happens, Johnny may not come out of it the same person. There have been hints that he could finally embrace the darker Demera side of himself, and honestly, that transformation could be one of the most compelling turns of the month. If he believes his family once again destroyed the people he loves, revenge may become more important than forgiveness. Meanwhile, Gabby Hernandez may be heading toward the collapse of her relationship with Philip Kyriakis. Once Philip learns that Gabby helped sabotage the merger and kept the truth from him for months, their relationship could become impossible to repair. To me, the betrayal itself may hurt less than the realization that the deception never really stopped. Another emotional layer comes with the return of Lexi Carver. Her reappearance could trigger painful fallout for Abe Carver, especially if he learns that Paulina Price and Theo Carver kept EJ's resurrection secret from him. I can easily see that becoming one of the most emotional family confrontations of the entire sweeps period. Then there is the situation involving Stephanie Kyriakis and Alex Kyriakis. The unexpected arrival of Joy Wesley with a baby could completely upend their marriage. Stephanie has already questioned whether motherhood fits into her future, so being suddenly forced into a possible stepmother role may push her farther away instead of closer. I was wondering if the baby itself may not be the real issue. It could be the fear that Alex may begin building a new life that no longer includes her. And then comes the detail that feels especially ominous: Stephanie wanting to learn how to use a gun. On a soap, that kind of detail is rarely random. It almost feels like the show is quietly planting the seeds for a tragedy. If Stephanie mistakes someone in the dark for a threat, especially someone connected to the ongoing danger around Salem, another accidental shooting could become one of May's biggest turning points. What stands out to me is that these stories all seem connected by the same theme: fear pushing people into irreversible choices. Whether it is jealousy, betrayal, grief, or self-protection, May Sweeps looks ready to show how quickly one emotional decision can change everything in Salem.